Hello and welcome to Christ Church's Leadership Podcast in the Wesleyan Tradition. I'm Charles Kyker, your host. Thanks for joining us today. I want to talk about something that I think a lot of people are interested in because it's something we deal with every day. And I want to talk about it in a way that maybe points to leadership. I want to talk about money. I want to talk about money for a moment and your use of money. But I want to talk about money in a way to simply ask you, do you have a system in place for your use of money? Do you have a system in place for your use of money? A system in place may be something as simple and old-fashioned, but still very important today as a budget. Do you have a system in place for your use of money? Do you have a system in place for the investment of your money and your resources? And then as we continue in the podcast, we'll draw a parallel between money and its importance as a resource. Money is a resource for us. We would say in the Christian faith, in the Judeo-Christian faith, money is not to be worshipped, but money is important. It's an important resource for us and how we use it. And today's scripture lesson is going to underscore that. So money is a resource. Your talents, your gifts, and your leadership is also a resource. And how you use it and the systems that you have in place will dictate your success as a leader. So let's look at two families in America that had systems. One, the lack thereof, and one actually developed a fairly healthy system, and that put them ahead. Now, some of what I'm going to share with you comes from Garrett Gunderson's writing as he studied some of the wealthy barons of our country, two in particular. Let's start off with Cornelius Vanderbilt. He made his fortune in transportation, started by ferrying goods in the New York harbor, just back and forth, of course, across that large expanse of water there. Later, he invested in shipping and expanded further, not only into shipping, but also into the railroad business. Vanderbilts made largely their fortune in the railroad business. And I'm talking from East Coast to West Coast, of course. At his death in 1877, Cornelius Vanderbilt had an estimated net worth of $100 million. Folks, that was more than the United States Treasury had held at the time. He had more money than the United States government. In today's money, it's an estimated worth of $200 billion. $200 billion at his death. He was a man, and that's with a B, of course. He was a man who actually lived below his means. And can I just get an FYI and a very important footnote? People don't get wealthy spending more than what they earn or what they bring in. Poor people do that. If you want to be wealthy, do what wealthy people do, or at least mirror or reflect it. If you want to be po, as we said in Julian, North Carolina, where I grew up, if you want to be po, then do what po people do and spend more than what you take in. Middle class and upper middle class, please don't miss this. Professionals are very poor. People who make $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 a year may have a net worth of $40,000 or $50,000 because they practice poverty. And they're impoverished because they spend more than what they take in. They don't have a healthy system of their use of money. Well, we'll continue on a little bit. Cornelius Vanderbilt did live below his means. He passed 95% of his wealth on to his son, William Henry Vanderbilt, and then the other 5% to his wife and his surviving children. The idea was that William Henry would lead the family business and would lead the transportation business, which is what the family did. Before he died, he did give $1 million at that time to Vanderbilt University. So he started the university for his namesake. William Henry, the son, actually doubled his inheritance before his death. He doubled his father's wealth. However, this was the last era that the Vanderbilt fortune would grow as the children and the descendants began to spend the money building no less than 10 mansions in Manhattan and several more around the country. The Breakers in Rhode Island. They also built a mansion in the western part of North Carolina that many people visit today called the Biltmore House. However, by 1947, all of the Vanderbilt mansions were torn down in Manhattan, and the Vanderbilt wealth was squandered. Squandered because they spent it as fast as they had it or they inherited it. Let's turn to the Rockefellers. John D. Rockefeller started Standard Oil in 1870. By 1880, his business was refining 90% of all the oil in the United States. Rockefeller once told a partner, quote, "We must remember we are refining oil for the poor man, and he must have it cheap and good." His refinement capacity and his intention to try to make sure the poor man had it good and quick took the price of oil from 58 cents down to 8 cents per gallon. At his death in 1937, he amassed more than $1.5 billion in wealth. If you look at some of the record-keeping companies or entities that exist, Guinness's Book of World Records has him as the first billionaire. What's ironic to me is being able to go to West Palm Beach and to be at West Palm Beach and to tour one of the mansions there and look at the Flagler mansion there. And Flagler was worth about $750 or $760 million himself. So in other words, John D. Rockefeller had partners in Standard Oil who did equally well. Even though John D. Rockefeller himself was the first billionaire, he had several multimillionaires that he brought along beside of him. Well, today, those estimates of his wealth range from $237 billion to $341 billion. In his lifetime, John D. Rockefeller donated over $530 million to charity, and he gave $431 million of his wealth to John D. Jr., often called Jr., who would run his family business. Unlike the Vanderbilts, the Rockefeller Trust has kept the money in the family, and the estimated worth is over $10 billion today of that trust. Today, more than 150 Rockefellers currently receive interest income from the family trust, and an estimated $50 million per year is donated to charity from the Rockefeller Trust. Two wealthy families, both equally entrepreneurial, both equally adding value to the building up of the country, but two different systems of managing wealth. What's your system in your area of leadership? What's your system of managing people? What's your system of developing people? What's your system of leadership? Because we all have resources at our disposal. The question is, are we being good stewards of them? Well, let's look at our text today from Genesis chapter 47, looking at verse 13. Joseph, of course, has been put in charge by Pharaoh of managing all of Egypt's affairs. He's the prime minister, if you will, second in command. So let's look at verse 13. First of all, I just want to say there's a crisis in the land. Okay, there's a crisis in the land. A couple of pointers I want to give you during a crisis. The first pointer I want to give you is people remember what you do during a crisis. People will remember what you do during a crisis. We were told that by our consultant from Enjoy Stewardship, Joe Sangle, and I don't know if it was original with Joe, but he was spot on. The second thing that you need to do during a crisis, and John Maxwell gave us this in a leadership podcast, is you have to over-communicate. During a crisis, you have to over-communicate because rumors become truthful in the ears of some. So you have to over-communicate the truth. You have to over-communicate what you're doing, what your plan is, where you're going, how you're going to try to go through, even if your plan is we're still trying to figure it out because we don't know. But you be honest, you be truthful, but you continue to communicate, even if you can only communicate that. We're working on it. We'll try to figure it out. Recently, because of the events of October the 7th in Israel, we've had to communicate during this crisis to almost 50 people signed up to go with us to Israel, nearly 50 people. We were looking at getting a super bus at Christ Church. And we had a lot of people that were wondering, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? Well, we tried to communicate. So we sent out a letter and we said, we're still working on it. We're like you. We're watching the news. We're trying to figure out. We had to recently communicate, of course, in the last several weeks that we're postponing the trip. We're still going to take it, but it's going to be in February of 2025. And go ahead and hang with us. We'd love to have you. So we have to communicate. Well, here the text says, meanwhile, the famine became so severe that all the food was used up, and the people were starving throughout the land of Egypt and Canaan. By selling grain to the people, Joseph eventually collected all the money in Egypt and Canaan, and he put the money in Pharaoh's treasury. When the people of Egypt and Canaan ran out of money, all the Egyptians came to Joseph. Our money's gone, they cried. So please give us food or we will die before your very eyes. Joseph replied, since your money is gone, bring me your livestock. I'll give you food in exchange for the livestock. So they brought the livestock to Joseph in exchange for food. In exchange for their horses, flocks, sheep, and goats, herds of cattle and donkeys, Joseph provided them with food for another year. But that year ended, and the next year they came again and said, we can't hide the truth from you, our Lord. Our money's gone. Our livestock and cattle are now yours. We have nothing left to give you but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your very eyes? Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We offer our land and offer ourselves as slaves for Pharaoh. Just give us grain so that we can live and not die, and so the land does not become empty and desolate. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, and all the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was so severe. And soon all the land belonged to Pharaoh. As for the people, he made them all slaves, from one end of Egypt to the other. The only land he did not buy was the land belonging to the priests. They received an allotment of food directly from Pharaoh, so they didn't have to sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, look, today I bought you and your land for Pharaoh. I will provide you with seed so that you can plant the fields. Then you will harvest it. 1/5 of your crop will belong to Pharaoh. You may keep the remaining 4/5 as seed for your fields and as food for you, your households, and your little ones. You've saved our lives, they exclaimed. May it please you, my Lord. Let us be Pharaoh's servants. Joseph then issued a decree still in effect in the land of Egypt that Pharaoh should receive 1/5 of all the crops grown in this land. Only the land belonging to the priest was not given to Pharaoh. Hence, at least for Egypt, the first time that a real tax was put into place. There's a lot of things that we could talk about in this passage, but I just want to note a couple of things that I have been reading from Vern Harnish, who's a leadership consultant. He goes into Fortune 500 companies, assesses their systems, assesses their situation, and speaks truth into them, kind of like Patrick Lencioni, who's a leadership consultant. Here's a couple of things that Vern said in his book. There are 3 barriers that prevent firms from moving along in growth and in their leadership capacity. First of all, number 1, there's a lack of leadership. A company can't move forward, a nonprofit can't move forward, a local church can't move forward if there's a lack of leadership. So goes the leadership, so goes the rest of the firm. Leaders need to be specific about direction. You don't just cast vision, but you cast strategic vision. Where are you going and how can we get there? And if you're not a systems person, if you're not a person that can put details to things, as a leader, be wise. Ask for help. Get people around you who can help you with this. When Pharaoh could not interpret the dream and it was bugging him, he felt like there was an important message in it. He asked for help. And then the chief butler remembered that there was a guy 2 years ago that interpreted his dream in the prison. And then he told Pharaoh, there's somebody I forgot. And there's somebody that comes to mind, and I think he can help you. All too often, we would be better leaders if we surrounded ourselves with people who were smarter than we are. Most leaders, though, will not surround themselves with smart leaders because, in a great fallacy and character flaw, they want to be the smart person in the room. And they want to be the primary person with vision and ideas. If that's the case, you're going to limit your leadership, you're going to limit your company, you're going to limit your organization. So get smart people around you. Get people around you who can help you, especially gifted and talented in areas that you're not. Number 2, he said there's a lack of systems and structures. There's a lack of healthy systems and structures. Andy Stanley used to say, I've never been to your church, but I can tell you this, your church is currently designed to get the output and the results that you're currently getting. If you want to change your church, if you want to grow your team, if you want to grow your ministry area, if you want to grow your local church, change your systems. If you don't change your systems, you're going to keep getting the same results you've been getting. So what systems need to change? How do they need to get healthier? One of the ways you might answer that is to ask for help. Ask for somebody to come in and evaluate your systems. Ask for help across other systems. Maybe you're in an organization where a particular team's doing really well. Ask them what they're doing. Ask them what's going on there. Maybe you can learn from that system. Maybe there's a what we call a benchmark. There's a benchmark industry. There's a benchmark business in your town or in your state, and they're doing really well. Go ask for help. John Maxwell said early on, probably in his mid to late 20s, he identified about 20 outstanding leaders that he felt like were really doing well. And of course, for him at the time, he was a pastor of a local church. So he identified 20 outstanding churches and leaders. Now, this is back in the late 1960s, early 70s. And what he told them was he would give them each $100 for 1 hour of their time. Folks, that was some decent money back in the early 1970s. He'd give them $100 for 1 hour of their time. In other words, they would become a consultant to him. Now, he said in a lot of cases, they freely said, well, listen, I've carved out the whole morning, so let's, we'll go for 2 hours and then we'll go get some coffee. But he said a lot of people gave him generous time because they knew he was serious. And so he would travel to he would take 3 weeks, and he identified them all over the country. And he would travel, and he had them on a schedule. And he would meet with them, and he would ask them questions about how do you grow people, how do you grow the organization, how do you make disciples, how do you grow your leaders. And so John asked the people for consultation. Today, just based upon this text, I'm going to lift up a couple must-haves in any organization that'll help you have healthy systems. I don't know what particular systems you need to have, but I know if you don't have this in place, you're not going to have any healthy systems. So here's the number one absolutely irrefutable must-have that you need in any organization, and it has to be employed in any system. Number one, compassion for people. Do you really care about the people you're leading? I don't think there's any doubt when you read this text. You may not agree with what Joseph did. You may say, well, wait a minute, he developed a codependent system, or he developed a system where it was top down or whatever. Well, there's an old saying, if you give somebody a fish, you feed them. But if you teach somebody to fish, then you feed them for life, because then they can go catch their fish. He partnered with these people during a crisis. And the other thing he didn't do, I think he helped them have their dignity. You can still work the land that you know well. You can still go work the land that you know well. But because you need the grain, and because Pharaoh has the grain, Pharaoh's going to allow you to continue to live where you live, going to continue to allow you farm what you farm. And hey, you get to keep 4/5 of it. Out of that 4/5, if you can store away 20 or 25% a year, and you can sell other people grain, then maybe eventually you can buy the land back from Pharaoh. Or maybe you'd eventually go to someplace else. He at least gave them some dignity there. But there is no doubt that I think Joseph led with compassion for people. He led with compassion for people. I watched an incredible interview that you can watch on YouTube between Craig Rochelle and Louis Guglio. And Craig asked Louis this question: how is it that you now in your mid-60s could pack the stadium with 55, 60,000 teens and 20-somethings with the passion? How is it that you could pack that stadium and you're in your mid-60s? And he said, I don't know if I want to answer that, because if I answer that, I don't want my answer to somehow think that I have figured out this generation, or that this generation is something to be figured out. He said, but I will tell you this. He said, I constantly want to learn what their struggles are. I constantly want to learn what their passions are. I constantly want to learn what they're dealing with in their life. And so when I do get up to speak, I can speak to them in a relevant way. So he said, I listen to some of the music they listen to. I go to where things are trending, and I look at what they're looking at on social media, and I try to think what's going on in their lives right now. But he said, the gospel is always relevant. Jesus is always relevant. And the gospel always speaks to the needs of the human heart. But you also got to care enough to listen to people. I thought Louis nailed it. And the second thing that's always ongoing is a passion for a solution, for a passion for win-win. Passion for win-win. How can you move the organization forward? How can you move the team forward? How can you move your product forward, your marketing forward, but at the same time help the people around you to win? I think you include them in the win-win. I think you think of ways, what's best for us, what's best for me. But if it's always best for me and it really, really, really sucks for you, then you've got to ask, is this the best solution? But is there a win-win? Is there something we can do that helps us do what we want to do and at the same time helps other people? And then the third thing is, how can you empower people? How can you empower people? Because when you feel powerless and you feel manipulated, you don't want to give much of yourself. You don't want to put your all into a situation. So how do you empower people where they feel like they're stakeholders? They've got some input. They've got some say. How do you do that in a situation so that there's some synergy? There's some energy that goes on. One of the hardest things that we do here at Christ Church is we have team teaching, and team teaching is not easy. It's not easy. There has to be give and take. There has to be ebb and flow. And in order for us to remain one church in multiple locations, then there's a certain foundation and covenant that we have to have as teaching pastors. Some of you may know that at each of our campuses, about 65 or 70% of the message is preached each weekend. Hopefully, that's the generality. Hopefully we don't chase rabbits or go in an entirely different direction. I don't think that happens. I trust my teaching team. But like we recently did a retreat where we had a chance to let people have input. We talked about the scriptures together. We tried to talk about ideas. And I tried to listen, that we listened to each other. And then we brought scriptures up, and then we brought ideas up, and we tried to give some ownership to this. This is juxtaposed to a system where there's one primary communicator at the church, and then the campus pastor, of course, intros the message. The message is shared, and then the campus pastor does a follow-up. And therefore, the primary communicator is the communicator of that entire church, but then the campus pastor gives the care, gives insight, has a chance periodically to cast vision, But that's a different system. That's a different structure. And the system we use, in order for the system to persevere, in order for us to continue being one church in multiple locations, and folks, we're coming up on our 20-year anniversary here at Christ Church, and not many churches continue on with having campuses like we have for 20 years. So I'm in the midst of looking at writing a book on going the distance and multi-site. How do you keep a system going? How do you keep it going for 20 years? And one of our must-haves is every weekend, as the pastor, the lead pastor at Christ Church, I give a chance to give a greeting to all the campuses. And that's a must-have because they need to know who the lead pastor is. And I need to present myself to them in a positive way. There needs to be a connection. Here's one of the realities I live with. I'm immortal. I could get killed in a car accident later today. If that happened, somebody else would have to come in eventually and instantaneously take my place. All of the campuses would need to know that person. And in order to know that person, they would need a vehicle to be able to know that person instantaneously. So within just a few weeks, there would be a way for that interim pastor or eventually that lead pastor to introduce himself or herself to the congregation. You need a system in place that does that, a system that connects you. And then 4 or 5 times a year, I preach to all the campuses. And I do it either through rotation and or through our venue of being able to have the same message live at all the campuses. And so we've got to have systems in place that communicate our DNA, whatever that DNA is, that also connect us. And then we need to have systems in place where people feel like they can give input and feel valuable. So today, we're not so much interested in being a Rockefeller or being a Vanderbilt, but how do you become a good Joseph? How do you become one of the greatest leaders that the Bible ever knows or ever speaks of? Because Joseph not only led well, Joseph lived well. Joseph forgave his brothers of a terrible, terrible deed when his brothers sold him into slavery. Joseph was healthy emotionally. And I think we can learn a lot from Joseph. But that's all for this podcast. Thank you for being a part of it. And I hope and pray you have a good 2024, a good year as we move forward.